Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Episode 288. We talked about mentoring here and there on the show before, but if you could write the job description for being a mentor, what would it say? People may have different opinions or ways they would define this, but for Dale McKay, our guest this week, mentorship is a passion area. Today, Dale is a VMware consultant focusing on federal customers, but Dale also has a lot of experience being a mentor to others. In fact, I'm honored to tell you he's been my mentor for years. So who better to take on this topic? In this discussion, you'll hear about Dale's early career in the Navy and his focus on advanced electronics. We'll talk a little bit about the transition to civilian life, and then we get into the responsibility distinctions between a mentor and a mentee. Let's check out what's in store straight from Dale as we get you to part one of our discussion with Dale McKay.
Dale McKay, welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast.
Hey guys, thanks very much for having me. It's a real pleasure of mine to finally get onto this podcast.
Yeah, it's everybody's dream. Dale, I noticed that you're currently a VMware consultant at I think it was Kforce. Can you tell us a little bit about that role, that position that you're in right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a VMware consultant. I work as a contractor to Dell. I work through a company called Kforce. This is a pretty recent opportunity for me. I was previously at VMware, and I'm sure we'll end up talking about that a little bit. I, like a lot of other people, was affected by the Broadcom merger and the layoffs that happened afterwards. And this opportunity presented itself, and it was exactly the opportunity that I wanted to do because I have a clearance and I get to work with federal customers, which was really where I wanted to be at this point in my career.
Super cool.
Nice. You have two moats. You have VMware experience and a clearance, right? There's a intersection.
That's a package that not a lot of people have. And then I'm sure at some point we'll end up talking about this. I also have a pretty strong network background. So when you overlay NSX on top of that network background, and then you put a clearance on top of it, I start to be one of a few people. I mean, there's a lot of guys, I guess, like me out there, but right now it's paying the bills. I'm very happy doing what I'm doing. I get a chance to be out in front of customers, actually talking to customers face to face, which is something I really enjoy doing. So it's been great.
That's amazing. I'm curious about your early career, how you got into tech. I noticed, or I think that we talked ahead of time, that you were actually in the Navy. Can you tell me about that story? Was it you were in ROTC at Harvard and went into the Navy afterwards? Was that it?
Yeah, something like that. Not exactly. So I grew up in Memphis. My family was not rich. My opportunities for college were either to get that ROTC scholarship. It's funny you would mention ROTC because I was in ROTC in high school, and that, I guess, kind of steered me towards the military. I didn't end up getting the ROTC scholarship, so I enlisted. I was part of what was called the Advanced Electronics Program. Now, I don't necessarily want to date myself, but my entry into the Navy was before
Don't say
we had
transistors.
personal computers.
Okay.
No, we had transistors.
Okay, perfect.
But as part of that advanced electronics program, I went through a lot of training, like almost 15 months, I think, worth of training, specifically around the advanced electronics. And that provided me with a skill that allowed me to later in my career kind of fall back on. I rode submarines for the 5 years I was in the Navy.
The silent service.
The silent service, exactly. Probably one of the things that I would comment most about my military is I was part of a submarine crew, and we actually have reunions every 3 years. In fact, this is our reunion year. So in September, a bunch of us will get together in Groton, Connecticut, and tell stories on each other in front of wives and whoever else is going to be there about things that we used to do when we were younger. It's a great time. Have still a couple of people that are really great friends out of that whole Navy era. The Navy was a great place for me to start. I obviously stayed in touch with people in my hometown, and I think the opportunity that the Navy afforded me provided me a better way of life than what I would have had if I'd stayed put in my hometown.
When you enlisted, do you get to pick an area of interest to be placed after you're officially part of the Navy? Or do they just say, hey, Dale, here's what you're doing? How does that work?
It's a little bit of both. Because I signed up for the Advanced Electronics program, I was given the opportunity to kind of choose what I wanted to do. And I chose, and then the Navy said, well, that's a great choice, but we actually need missile technicians. So you're going to be going to missile technician school. And I was fine with that.
Was that after going through advanced electronics, or?
No, that was part of the advanced electronics.
Okay.
There's like a
specialty,
a basic phase, and then a more advanced phase.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Was that like you took the ASVAB and then qualified to go into the advanced electronics course, and that was kind of a condition of you enlisting, or was it enlistment and then qualifying and then actually going? Oh, sorry. The Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery.
No, when I enlisted into that advanced electronics program, and it was based on my ASVAB scores. Like a lot of veterans that get out, I think I probably struggled for the next couple of years, although I was given some opportunities based on some of that knowledge that I had gained when I was in the Navy. I spent some time as a biomedical equipment field engineer. That meant that I went to hospitals and worked on biomedical equipment, EKG equipment specifically. And we're talking in the industry at that time, it was still acceptable to repair stuff in the field. We were right on the cusp of when you would just replace instead of repair. So there were pieces of equipment that had boards in it, much like a PC expansion slots, right? And we had to be capable of fixing those boards in the field. And then again, like I said, towards the end of that was when they said, you know what, just don't bother fixing them. We'll just send you a replacement. You send that back to us, and they could pay somebody to sit on a bench and fix it a lot cheaper than what they were paying me to drive somewhere and fix it. So,
right, it's a time pressure, but I would imagine that also had to do something with like manufacturing costs too.
It was just a change in the industry,
Mm-hmm. Field replacement instead of field repair.
Yeah, I think really that base level understanding of electricity and electronics has really served me well, because when people say, well, the buffer's full and you're getting a buffer overflow, I don't know that people can equate that to what that physically means. That buffer is a chip, even if it's part of an ASIC now, there's still that concept that that's a finite amount of space in that buffer. Like I said, I think that in-depth understanding has really helped me grasp different concepts as I've moved through my career.
Was this interest in electronics specifically present before you went in, like, did someone in your life influence you in that direction? Was that something you tinkered with before? Some of our previous guests, they took computers apart, built their own computer, tinkered around. I didn't know if that was some of the reasons you chose to pursue it, or if it was different.
I hate to say this, but this was before computers, before personal computers for sure. So I didn't have the opportunity to take apart computers, but I did have the opportunity to work on car stereos, which I don't know that is a direct correlation, but there's some electronics involved there. I think maybe that's where that interest got started. I mean, I went in the Navy right after high school, so it was an early career decision to do that.
Okay.
I didn't even know the word career at that point. I just knew that the Navy was going to pay me money and they were going to give me a skill, and that sounded pretty cool, and I got to travel.
What are some of those challenges that people just don't understand about going into the service and then adapting back to civilian life that you got hit with once you were out?
In the service, you are never your own master. And when you get out of the service, you are your own master. So what kind of master are you going to be? And I think that's probably something that I struggled with for a little bit. I grew my hair out. I had shoulder length hair. I had this big long beard. I looked like somebody from ZZ Top. And it was just the freedom of, not having to have a haircut every inspection day that you said, wow, I'm free of that. So, wow, look at this. Look at what I can do. And there were other aspects where that same mentality kind of rippled through. And then, we talked about points of inflection in your career. I think you hit a point where you're like, okay, wait a minute. Which path do I really want to be on? And is the path I'm on going to serve me long term? You kind of start to wake up and say, yeah, maybe I need to be doing things a little bit different, or some things a little bit different. Maybe even just a different attitude. Once you kind of stepped out from underneath that discipline of the Navy, a lot of people tended to swing that pendulum back the other way and say, yeah, nobody's ever going to control me again, or whatever, some conversation along those lines. And the reality is we all know that's not true, right? Because everybody has someone that controls them. And if somebody's listening to podcasts and say, yeah, nobody controls me, maybe you're one of the lucky ones and you don't have wives, children, parents, grandparents, people who look up to you. Maybe you don't have those situations, but we all have them. So I had my time of rebellion, if you'll call it that, where you kind of swung that pendulum over, and I could have stayed there. I know guys who did stay there, but it wasn't going to be a good place for me to stay. So that's why I kind of made some changes and kind of tried to swing that pendulum maybe a little bit more back towards the middle of the road, if you will.
It's interesting that you say that, because it reminds me of some other conversations that I've had in slightly different contexts of people leaving a culture and then spending quite a bit of time defining themselves in opposition of that culture.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Eventually, some people will get to the point where they're like, well, actually, I don't want to define myself in relationship to that culture at all. I've left that culture. I'm going to take the good parts, my friendships, whatever, the relationships, the experiences, the lessons that I've learned, and I'm going to move forward. And I'm going to move forward not in relationship to that thing that I left. I just need to move.
And I would take that one step further, John. You said some people would do all that and then move forward. Mm-hmm. There's also a mindset that you can develop that says, I don't want to move forward. In fact, maybe I want to regress a little bit because I've done all of this moving forward at someone else's behest, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm done moving forward for a little bit. I'm going to revert a little bit. That's where I think a lot of people find themselves in trouble. When I got out of the military, we didn't have any of the programs that we have today. While I was at VMware, I was involved in multiple veterans programs. I think one of them was called Skill Bridge, where we had people who were leaving the military come in for internships at VMware. We didn't have programs like that when I got out of the military. It was like, here's your papers, here's your last paycheck, good luck to you, see you, bye. And you were kind of left to figure it out on your own. Now, again, this was a different age. This was a different time. Our culture was different then. But I think my comment about sometimes people don't want to move forward, they want to do that regression. And that's really where they find themselves in trouble, I think.
That's very insightful. I really appreciate that reflection. I sometimes wonder what we're doing for the youth in our country that would enable them to follow in our footsteps and kind of be, on the vendor side, but not as a software engineer or as a hardware engineer, kind of in these a little bit, more nebulous roles like systems engineering, solution engineering, tech marketing, even in, consulting roles. There's no path to it through traditional colleges and things. It's all kind of this hazy, mentor, mentee, or, apprentice, journeyman master, but, without even the structure that the trades like put around that, for example, right? Like a journeyman electrician means something.
It does. Yep.
And there's no like journeyman VMware consultants, right?
I've heard recently, and I forget where I read this, but a lot of college bound people these days are choosing to go to the trades instead of go to college. I know one of the things that we want to talk about on this podcast is mentoring, and I'm going to give you a very prime example of why this works. And I'm going to weave in a little bit of a mentor story around this. All right. And why I think this may be the way forward for a lot of our youth is to return to the trades because of the skills that they get. Those skills are almost what I would call hard skill. Like if you have your electrician's license, you can pretty much get work anywhere. If you're a good plumber, you can pretty much get work anywhere. It doesn't matter how you got it, whether you went through some union apprentice program or you worked with a family friend, it almost doesn't matter. As long as you have that demonstrable hard trade skill, you're going to be very employable. And we know that that's not always the case when you look at college diplomas. If I have a certain college diploma, used to be that guaranteed you a job. I don't know that that's necessarily the way it is today. I think some of our leading educational institutions have lost some of that guaranteed work mindset that used to exist in the workforce. So my story is this about mentoring and why this works. The person I'm going to talk about, we're going to call him Joe. It's not his real name. And Nick, I think, may have heard part of this story before. Don't know if I was at Dell or VMware when I first met Joe, but I met him on LinkedIn and he had posted that he just passed his first Cisco test. I think I was still at Dell, as a matter of fact, because I was doing a lot of Cisco stuff. And I reached out to him. I said, hey, congrats. There's more tests ahead of you. And I established a relationship with him. And he was 14 years old at the time, because society's what it is. I met his parents. I told him that I wanted to help him in his studies and tutor him. And we started meeting every Saturday. And I had a pretty extensive Cisco home lab. We would take a particular section that he was studying for a test, and we would dissect it and go through the lab, and I would ask him questions and explain it to him. And he passed his CCNA, and he was, I don't know, maybe 15 when he did that. Then he passed his CCNP, and I don't know, maybe 16. The kid sat for his CCIE lab just as he turned 18 years old. All right.
Wow.
Now, he didn't pass it. And if you know anything about CCIE labs, they have I think a 30% first pass success rate. So it didn't surprise me that he didn't pass it. Just to kind of fast forward, I'm having breakfast with Joe on Saturday. Joe now works as part of the Apple network engineering team, and his first job at Apple was well into six figures, along with all the Apple stock that you get when you join Apple. And the kid doesn't have. He since now has gone back and gotten some college. In my mind, that's where a lot of the youth need to focus is on developing those hard skills like that are demonstratable and can get you those types of jobs. His may be that 1 in 100 story, and we can get into this more when we talk about the mentoring. I think those of us that are in this industry and have the knowledge and the ability to reach back and help people either through mentoring or whatever other program you want to implement, I think it's incumbent upon us to do it. Because if we don't, they are left to develop that on their own. And I think that that's almost a very selfish move on our part because we have this knowledge, we have this experience that is invaluable to people like that you can go and lay that at their feet, let them pick up and use whatever it is that they want, but at least you've made that effort to try and help them better themselves by utilizing your knowledge and your experience.
I got to tell you, I was just thinking, why don't we go into the mentor stuff right now because we're on the topic. Let's just back it up and define it. What's a mentor and what's a mentee?
So this is Dale McKay's definition. I don't know that I've ever seen this written.
Mm-hmm.
But in my mind, a mentor does two things. He erects a set of guardrails for your career, but he will not let you fly over that guardrail. You may hit it hard, but he's not going to let you fly over that guardrail. That's the first thing he does. The second thing he does is if you imagine going back to the military, everybody's standing in line and you're a sergeant or your chief petty officer or whatever rank service you're in says, who's going to volunteer for this? That mentor is the one who shoves that mentee out so that he volunteers for something that he didn't think he could do or he didn't think he would be good at. And he's holding himself back because he doesn't think he'll be good and just needs that little extra shove that says, yeah, that's you. Go ahead. You can do this.
Yeah, I've been a victim of some of those shoves, so I definitely know what you mean. In a good way.
And how'd that work out for you?
It worked out great.
You know, because to me, that's the two things that a mentor can do is erect that set of guardrails. And in the process of erecting that set of guardrails, you're going to share a lot of that experience. You're going to share a lot of that knowledge because that's essentially what those guardrails are. And in terms of that shove from behind, look, we all have situations where we can look back and go, man, if I'd only done whatever it might be, that could have been an inflection point in your own career or in your own life. And why didn't you do it? Because you hesitated. And if you had not hesitated, things could have been different. I'm not excluding myself from this group. I've had those moments. You know, I didn't always have someone to shove me through that open door. I guess a good almost visual analogy would be you're standing at that open door and maybe you're even like leaning in, looking around, seeing what's in here. But then you draw back and you're like, I don't know if I want to go in there or not. Whereas if you just have that one little shove that shoves you in, it's like beams of sunlight all of a sudden just beam down on you, you know, and you hear choirs singing the whole bit. And you're like, wow, how come I didn't do this before? There you go. That's my very long-winded definition of a mentor.
I like that. This kind of guardrails, I think you said, you know, so setting up structure maybe is how I'll interpret that. And then making sure that they're consistently challenged.
Yes.
And maybe giving them the occasional kick in the pants. Right. I know I've benefited from that before.
Yeah, the guardrails, with some of the people that I've worked with, we have set goals. And a mentor should never set a goal for a mentee because I can't set goals for you. Only you can set goals. Now, once you have spoken that goal, I can help you achieve that by holding you accountable. Now, how you go down that path of achieving that goal is kind of up to you. That's the guardrail that I'm talking about. You know, I'm going to hold you accountable if you're studying for a cert and you tell me I'm studying this and then we have some meeting and you say, well, yeah, I didn't really get any studying in. Well, that might be where one of those guardrails kind of bumps up against you and says, well, how are you going to pass this cert if you don't study? It's not going to come by osmosis. Then you start to look at, what's that issue and adjust that guardrail based on where that issue is. Maybe it's a family commitment. Okay, I get it. Maybe it's hard material. Okay, I get that too. But let's adjust that guardrail so that we still keep moving forward towards that ultimate goal of getting that cert passed.
Can you share with us what made you want to mentor people in this way?
No, I don't really know why I enjoy it so much. But I will tell you this, working with mentees who take it serious and strive to do whatever it is that you're helping them do, whether it's career, whether it's a big career mentoring, or whether it's a very specific, almost task mentoring, when you see them succeed because of their hard effort, that is very gratifying to me. I like to see people succeed, but when I know that they have succeeded because of maybe that set of guardrails that I put in place and help them steer down that path, then I walk away with a good feeling knowing that I have helped them to realize something that maybe they wouldn't have been able to realize by themselves, maybe. And I always say that the mentees are the ones that do all the work. I think every one of my mentees, if you ask them that, they would say that that's one of the phrases that I use is that you guys are the ones doing the work. I just provide that set of guardrails to keep you focused to some degree on what your goal is or where you're trying to go.
And I think if you are trying to achieve a goal that you've never achieved before, working with someone who can build the train track so that you can drive the train over it, or at least tell you the general direction the train tracks need to go, is extremely helpful. But to your point, you have to be willing to walk that path that somebody helps shape for you. And then they try to keep you on it so that if you're going off the rails, figuratively speaking or literally speaking, you can course correct. When you are mentoring someone, I guess in a way you have to decide whether it's going to be a fit and they're going to take it seriously, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I've had mentor-mentee relationships that just didn't work. And for everybody out there who's like, oh, yeah, I want to do this. I want to be a mentor. There's one rule that you need to understand. None of this applies to your immediate family. I have 3 boys. Was I a great mentor to them? No, you'd have to ask them. I don't feel like I was. To this day, I can't mentor them the way I can mentor other people. And if you follow any of the kind of self-help gurus, a Tony Robbins, Brendan Bouchard, any of those people, they will validate that the hardest people for you to mentor are the people who are closest to you, because they see your flaws and that's what they're focused on instead of focusing on the good that you're trying to do. But it's just they know you in a different way than as a mentor.
There's a lot of emotional overtones.
Yes.
That come along with those kinds of conversations, structural conversations and holding somebody accountable for something. I can see what you're saying. It's better to have somebody at an emotional distance.
Yes.
To be able to hold them accountable and not have that ring other parts of the relationship, right?
Yep. That's one piece of advice I give all those aspiring mentors is don't practice this at home because your results are probably not be indicative of how good of a mentor you could actually be.
So if we flip it or turn it just slightly, if I'm the person who needs mentorship, are there some suggestions you have for ways that I can sniff out whether I have landed on a mentor that's going to be able to help me?
I think one of the things that you need to ask yourself as a mentee, and this is a very selfish question, and it's going to sound very selfish, but it's really at the heart of what we're doing here. How can that mentor help me? Because if you say, well, I want a mentor. Okay, well, What do you want him to mentor you in? Well, career growth. Okay, would I go to somebody who was on the same level as me for career growth? That kind of doesn't make any sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would I go to the CEO of the company? Well, maybe if you could get to him, but that's probably not going to work either. What you want to find is someone who's already been down that journey and can show you where the pitfalls are, where the rocks are, where the easy path is. That's what you want to get as a mentee out of that mentor. It's a very selfish thing, but again, why are you doing this? If you just want to say, well, I have a mentor, well, that's great. Okay, what's he do for you? Well, I don't know. We don't meet very often. That's not a mentor. That's a friendship, you know? So to answer your question, Nick, I think it's up to the mentee to determine what he wants out of this relationship. And he needs to communicate that to the mentor. And if the mentor is not on board with that, then you need to move on until you find one that is on board. It's just going to be a waste of your time if the two of you aren't going in the same direction.
Yeah, 100%. And to your point, when you ask yourself, what can this person do for me? That should, to some extent, point you in the direction you need to go. Because if you want to be let's say you want to be a people manager and you're not, you probably want a mentor who's a people manager or a second line people leader. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they would have to be a leader in the same discipline or area where you work. I mean, maybe someone should to get that nuance, but there are certainly lessons you could learn, I would think, from people who are leaders in other areas, just about leadership in general, that are going to apply across the board. My hypothesis is that I don't necessarily have to seek out a mentor who necessarily does and works in exactly the same discipline area as me.
I would agree 100% with that. The other thing that I think, if you're trying to find a mentor, you need to understand what that person's background is. Because if you are relying on them to help you in a particular area, let's say, like you mentioned, people managing, or maybe in technical growth or something like that, if they haven't done that, they can't teach you. And I think that sometimes that kind of gets lost. People go to people for help or to be a mentor, but when you look, the people they went to don't have that experience, so they don't have a foundation of how to guide someone into that. I can't learn people management by reading books or attending seminars. I have to roll my sleeves up and do it. If I haven't done it or I'm not currently doing it, then why would you come to me as a mentee and say, mentor me in people management? Okay, yeah, I'll do that. I read a book about it, and here's what it said. That's, again, just a waste of everybody's time. So decide what it is that you want out of the relationship. That's the first thing that needs to happen. If it's career growth, great. I'm all for career growth. Now, what does that mean to you? Does that mean promotions? Does that mean expanded knowledge? Does that mean industry recognition? Like if you come to me and you say, I want you to mentor me so that I can speak at VM Explorer. Well, one of the first things I'm going to ask you is, have you ever spoken publicly before? If you haven't spoken public, then that's probably the first thing that we need to do. So it to me, again, going back to as a mentor, it's about me sharing my experience with the mentee. If I don't have that experience, then I don't have what that mentee needs. And I've had situations like that where a mentee came to me and said, hey, I want to be better at this. And I just didn't have that knowledge of how to make them better. Now, that doesn't mean you can't find somebody that you can point them to or make an introduction and say, hey, I think this guy could really benefit from some of your time. Why don't you just meet with him and see if you guys hit it off or whatever. And there also has to be a little bit of a personal relationship that becomes involved too. I mean, this can't be just a transactional type relationship where, okay, did you do this item this week? Did you do this item this week? That's not mentoring. That's, I don't know, accountability, but it's certainly not mentoring.
I would also tell you that if the mentor and mentee can get to know each other better and develop that personal relationship that Dale spoke about, mentors have this way of delivering the right advice just when you need it. I can't tell you how many times I was on a regular mentoring call with Dale. I had a specific challenge related to what we were working on together that I needed help with, and he had the right advice for me at the right time. It has happened repeatedly. I don't know how the guy does it, but thanks, Dale. I also think that that match between the mentor and mentee is really important. As Dale said, if a mentor doesn't have the experience you as the mentee need, they're not the right mentor for you. I was matched up with Dale as part of a formal mentoring program inside VMware through the CTO Ambassador program. And interestingly enough, in our first conversation, Dale told me a little bit about what I could expect from the mentor-mentee relationship, and then he did something that I didn't expect. He said, "Hey, Nick, before you decide whether you want me to work with you or not, I want you to go talk to these other people that I've mentored in the past, and I want you to get their feedback on what it's like to work with me. Then, based on that, I want you to let me know whether you think it's a good idea that we continue working together." And I went and talked to those people, just like he said, and I learned that he's a great person to work with as a mentor, and that's how it started. But I definitely didn't expect him to be so focused on making sure it was a right fit for me. So I hope that the potential mentor out there can use that as a guiding light. Make sure it's right for the mentee. Make sure you have the experience that they need. And if you don't, as Dale mentioned, tell them you don't. Maybe point them in a different direction. And this idea of mentorship as sharing experience so that people don't have to figure things out on their own, I think this is a callback to Dale's comment about getting out of the Navy and kind of being left in a lot of ways to figure out that transition without a lot of support. Could that be the reason Dale became a mentor in the first place? I won't spoil it for you, but we'll talk more about that next week. If you enjoyed this conversation with Dale, please share it with a friend, rate us 5 stars, and consider writing a review. We'll catch you next week.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at VJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.